A kind waitress once bought coffee for a stranger, never guessing he was a billionaire searching for someone worthy of his heart. Rain drummed softly against the cafe's tall windows, turning the city outside into a blur of silver streaks. Inside, the rich scent of coffee wrapped around the room, mingling with the earthy smell of wet pavement. Customers huddled over steaming cups, grateful for a cozy refuge from the storm. The door swung open with a squeak, letting in a gust of cold air. A man in his early 50s stepped inside. His coat, thin and frayed at the cuffs, was soaked through, and his scuffed shoes left small dark prints on the polished floor. Raindrops clung to his salt and pepper hair as he scanned the menu, hesitation flickering in his tired eyes. He cleared his throat and spoke so quietly the hum of the espresso machine nearly drowned him out. "Just a black coffee, please." The young barista rang it up, but when the man patted his pockets, his face paled. His fingers trembled as he searched again and again, growing frantic. I must have left my wallet at home," he murmured, shame creeping into his voice. "Would it be all right if I stayed a while, just until the rain stops?" The barista leaned on the counter, jaw tight, lips curling into a smirk. "This isn't a shelter, old man," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "No cash, no coffee, and definitely no loitering." A flush spread across the man's cheeks. "I wasn't asking for a handout," he said softly. "Just a dry place for a moment." From a corner table, a group of well-dressed patrons burst into derisive laughter. "Imagine that," one sneered. "Barging in here with nothing and expecting service. Next thing you know, beggars will be ordering lattes," another added with a theatrical sigh. The man's shoulders sagged. He turned toward the door, humiliation pressing down on him like the rain outside. Across the room, Emma paused mid-step, balancing a tray of empty mugs. Her auburn hair, tied back in a loose ponytail, framed eyes that now burned with quiet fire. She set her tray down with a soft clink, reached into the pocket of her modest apron, and laid a crisp $5 bill on the counter. "That's enough," she said firmly. Her clear voice slicing through the whispers, the barista's grin faltered. "Emma, come on," he scoffed. "You don't need to pay for this guy. He's just trying to get something for free." Emma's gaze swept the room, calm but unwavering. "I'm covering his coffee," she said. "Not out of pity, because I know how it feels to be judged for having less." From the corner, someone snorted. "How heroic," a man jeered. "Maybe you're hoping he'll tip you later." Emma turned to face him, her back straight, voice steady as glass. "Kindness isn't a bargain," she said. "It doesn't cost us dignity to care. But mocking someone who's struggling, that shows who's really small." Silence spread through the cafe, heavy as the rain. The laughter faded, replaced by a hush of uneasy reflection. Emma turned back to the man and offered a warm smile. "Please sit wherever you like," she said. "I'll bring your coffee over in a minute. Don't let their words tell you who you are." His eyes glistened, gratitude shimmering just beneath the surface. He nodded and chose a seat near the window, where rivulets of rain ran down the glass like silver threads. As Emma brewed his drink, the air in the cafe seemed to shift, guilt and thoughtfulness settling over the room. In that quiet moment, she stood taller than anyone there, and the man once dismissed as nothing seemed to gather himself again. To everyone else, he'd been a man unworthy of notice, but for him, the smallest kindness had been a lifeline, proof that someone still saw value in him. That moment in the cafe stayed with Emma long after her shift ended. As she cleared the last table, the clatter of cups faded into whispers and sideways glances. The air felt thick, like smoke you couldn't quite escape. The next morning, Brian, the manager, called her into his cramped office. The room reeked faintly of burnt coffee and bleach. He didn't smile. "Close the door," he said. Emma obeyed, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "This is a business," Brian began, folding his arms across his chest. "Not a place for you to play charity." Emma stayed silent, eyes steady. "You don't get to hand out freebies," he pressed on. "If you want to play Mother Teresa, do it off the clock." "I paid for it," Emma replied evenly. "That's not the point," Brian snapped, irritation sparking in his voice. "You embarrassed your co-worker and made customers uncomfortable." Emma's gaze sharpened. "No," she said quietly. He embarrassed himself. Brian's jaw clenched. "Don't push me, Emma. You're here to serve, not give lectures." A tense beat hung in the air. "Can I go?" she asked. He gestured toward the door with a sharp nod. "Get out, and remember your place." In the kitchen, Marcy and Josh stood by the sink. They fell silent as Emma passed. "Must be nice," Marcy muttered, just loud enough to sting. "Playing saint when you still split rent with your kid sister." Josh chuckled under his breath. Bet she thought the guy was some secret millionaire. Emma didn't react. She hung up her apron, slipped on her coat, and stepped outside into the light drizzle. The city smelled of wet pavement and exhaust. She didn't hurry. Her apartment, a drafty one-bedroom with cracked paint, held a fragile kind of warmth. Lily lay curled up on the couch, shivering beneath a thin blanket. "Hey," Emma whispered, brushing damp strands from her sister's forehead. "You're late," Lily mumbled. Emma smiled faintly. "Got caught in the rain." She reheated a bowl of porridge, added a pinch of salt, and handed it over. Later, she opened her wallet. 3 crumpled dollars, a subway token, and a worn photo of their mom. She folded the money carefully and slid it back inside. No regret. Not for the coffee, not for the stand she'd taken. When Lily drifted off to sleep, Emma sat by the window. Rain traced thin silver lines down the glass, and her own reflection stared back, pale, tired, but steady. Her thoughts wandered to a memory. 15 years old, clutching her mother's hand in a crowded market when her mom suddenly collapsed. Strangers kept walking. Only one woman stopped. An old lady with a patched skirt who knelt, offering water and wrapping a shawl around Emma's shoulders. Emma never learned her name, but she never forgot her kindness. That moment became a promise. So when she'd seen that drenched, ashamed man in the cafe, there hadn't been a choice to make. She acted because it was right. The judgment didn't matter. Before turning off the light, she whispered into the dark. Better mocked for kindness than praised for silence. In that tiny apartment, with little more than dignity to her name, she felt something rare. Peace. 4 days passed. 4 long shifts full of half-heard whispers and lingering looks. Emma had grown used to being invisible, but now she stood out, not for anything she'd sought, but because she'd dared to care. The stares weighed more than silence ever had. That morning, the cafe hummed with its usual rhythm. Clinking cups, hissing steam, low chatter. Emma moved from table to table, wiping crumbs, stacking plates, offering polite smiles. Then the bell over the door chimed. She didn't glance up at first, but a subtle shift in the air tugged at her attention. A tall man stepped inside, dressed in a charcoal suit and silk scarf. His salt and pepper hair gleamed under the lights, and his polished shoes tapped lightly against the floor. He looked as though he belonged in a corner office high above the city, not in their little cafe. Yet something in his eyes stopped her cold. He didn't go to the counter. Instead, he walked straight to the window, to the same seat where a rain-soaked man had once sat in shame, and settled there without a word. Emma's fingers tightened around the rag she held. Her pulse quickened. Should she greet him as a stranger, or admit she remembered? Before she could decide, he looked up, gaze steady. "I'm not here to order," he said calmly. Emma froze. "I just have one question," he continued. "Why did you help me?" She blinked, caught between recognition and disbelief. I couldn't stand by," she said. "You didn't know me," he pressed. "You had nothing to gain." "You didn't look like someone after a handout," Emma replied softly. "You looked like someone being made small, and I know what that feels like." Slowly, she sat across from him, her heart pounding in her chest. Emma slid into the chair across from him, setting the menu gently aside. "When I was 17, she began, voice low. My mom collapsed in a market. People just stepped around her, like she was an inconvenience." She looked down at her hands. "Everyone except one woman, an old lady with almost nothing herself. She stayed with us, gave me water, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders. I promised that day I'd be like her if I ever got the chance." Charles didn't interrupt. He simply watched, his face open, waiting. "That's what I remembered that day in the cafe." Emma said softly. That promise. A quiet pause stretched between them. Then he tilted his head. Do you read? Emma blinked. Books? He nodded. I used to, she said. Not much lately. I liked stories about ordinary people, doing brave things. A faint smile touched his lips. Good choice. They talked then. About books, about cities they'd loved, about music, Bach, Chopin, little melodies that made the world feel less heavy. They spoke about why people sometimes grow cruel when they feel powerless. He mentioned authors Emma had never heard of, and she didn't pretend otherwise. She just listened, curious, open. Minutes melted into more minutes. The clatter of cups and hiss of steam faded into a soft background hum. At one point, Emma laughed, a real unguarded laugh she hadn't felt in days. You're not what I expected, she said. He raised an eyebrow, amused. And what did you expect? She shrugged. Someone who just wanted to say thanks and disappear. He looked down for a moment, then back at her, his gaze steady. I've had wealth for a long time, he said quietly, but almost no one has made me feel human again. That day you did. Emma didn't answer. She didn't need to. In that moment, they were simply two people, not waitress and billionaire, not rescuer and rescued, just two souls seeing each other clearly. A week after that meeting, an envelope arrived at Emma's door. Heavy ivory, no return address, only a card inside embossed with gold lettering and the unmistakable crest of the Ainsley, a legendary five-star hotel downtown. The kind that hosted presidents, not waitresses from side street cafes. Her name gleamed at the top, Emma L. Bennett. Guest of Charles H. Evelyn. She stared for a long time, the afternoon sun catching the gold seal like a quiet dare. Part of her wanted to throw it away, but curiosity and a strange pull in her chest led her 3 days later to the hotel lobby. She wore her only nice blouse, borrowed shoes, and pinned her hair back with trembling fingers. Walking through the revolving doors felt like stepping into another universe. Polished marble floors, chandeliers dripping with crystal light, people moving with an air of quiet privilege. Emma approached the reception desk, voice barely steady. Emma Bennett, I think I have a meeting. The concierge nodded smoothly, as if she belonged there, and directed her to a private lounge on the 21st floor. Mr. Evelyn will join you shortly. Riding the elevator. Emma's heart thudded against her ribs. The lounge was hushed. Opulent leather chairs, soft jazz from unseen speakers, and a skyline view so vast it felt like standing at the edge of the world. She hovered near the window, wondering if she had made a mistake. When the door opened behind her, she turned. Charles entered, but not the damp, hunched man from the cafe, nor the casually dressed figure she'd met later. This Charles carried presence the way others wore suits. Flanked by two discreet assistants, he crossed the room with quiet authority, dismissing them with a nod as they slipped out. Emma, he said, voice smooth, low. Thank you for coming. She tried for a smile, though her throat tightened. This isn't exactly a coffee shop. He gestured toward a table set with tea, fresh fruit, and a single untouched espresso. Please, he said, sit. Emma obeyed, unsure if she was being welcomed or weighed. Charles settled opposite her, hands folded. I wanted to tell you in person, he began, because anything less would feel dishonest. She waited. My name, he said finally, is Charles H. Evelyn. I'm the founder of Evelyn Holdings. We work in 12 countries. Infrastructure, social impact investments. Emma's breath caught. Words failed her. I wasn't pretending to be someone else, he added quickly. But that morning at the cafe I dressed down. I left my wallet behind on purpose. I wanted to see what people would do when there was nothing to gain. Emma stared at the tea, its surface rippling faintly as if it might give her answers. My wife passed away 15 years ago, Charles went on, his voice quieter now. Cancer sudden. He paused, gathering himself. We never had children. After she died, I stopped trusting people. I stopped believing kindness could still be real. So I began traveling in disguise, visiting cities, towns, not to be seen but to see. Not just to see the world, Charles finished quietly, but to see who still lives with heart in it. His gaze found hers. That day I found someone, Emma's throat tightened. She couldn't tell if she felt honored or ambushed. "So, you set me up?" Her voice trembled despite her effort to steady it. "No," he said gently. "I didn't approach you. I didn't ask for anything. I just watched, and you chose." Emma shook her head, half in disbelief. "I don't know if I should be grateful or angry." "I understand," he said, nodding. Emma rose suddenly, her chair scraping against the rug. "So what now? You tell me I passed your little morality test, and then what? Do you write me a check? Offer me a car, a job?" Charles didn't flinch. "I offer you nothing, unless you're willing to hear me out." Her breath came unevenly, a storm of curiosity, resentment, awe, and something softer she couldn't name. He stood too, moving toward the window, hands clasped behind his back. "I wasn't testing you, Emma," he said again, voice low but steady. "I was searching for something I thought the world had lost. And maybe someone to remind me what it means to be seen, not as a billionaire, not as a burden, just as a man." She studied him in silence. "I don't want to buy your gratitude," he added quietly. "But I would like to ask, would you have a coffee with me again? No expectations, no pretenses." Emma looked past the skyline, past the polished table and his flawless suit, straight into his eyes, the same eyes she'd seen in the cafe, damp with shame, clutching an old coat. He was still that man. Somehow that mattered more than everything else. She exhaled slowly. "I don't know what this is," she said softly, "or what you think it could be. But I know who I am." Charles turned, something unspoken flickering in his expression. "And who's that?" Her smile was small, calm, honest. "Someone who didn't do it to be noticed. And someone who won't stay if that's all this turns out to be." A quiet smile touched his lips. "That," he said, "is what makes you different." For the first time, Emma understood this wasn't a test. It was an invitation, not into wealth or luxury, but into something rarer. Being seen, being remembered for the choices you make when no one's watching. Emma didn't expect to hear from Charles again. She thought perhaps that surreal afternoon at the hotel was the end of it, a window into a life she'd never stepped through. But the very next day, another envelope arrived. No gold crest this time, only her name written in careful pen. Inside was a single note, written in a steady hand. "Emma, I'll be in Montreal next week. I go every year. It's quiet, peaceful. I'd like you to come. No business, no formality, just company, just conversation. No expectations, only an invitation." Charles tucked beside it was a round-trip train ticket. Emma held it for a long time, fingers tracing the edge. That night, in the tiny kitchen of their apartment, rice simmering on the stove, Lily sat curled on the couch, sipping tea between soft coughs. "You're quiet," Lily said, studying her. Emma gave a small smile. "That's rare, huh?" "You're thinking about him," Lily guessed. Emma nodded. She told her sister everything, the note, the ticket, the way it felt like a door had opened, one she'd never dared to knock on. "I don't know if I belong in his world," Emma confessed. "What if I embarrass myself? What if it changes how I see myself or how he sees me?" Lily was silent for a moment, then said something Emma would carry forever. "You've spent your whole life making space for other people. Maybe it's time to see what happens when someone makes space for you." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to rain against the glass, the hum of buses below, the steady tick of the old clock. She thought of the cafe, the laughter, the scorn. She thought of Charles's eyes, searching, humble, human, and she remembered her mother's words. "Don't wait for life to find you. Sometimes you have to go find it yourself." By sunrise, she'd decided. She packed light, one bag, a worn journal, 2 changes of clothes, and the book she'd been too tired to finish for months. She left Lily a note on the fridge with grocery money tucked inside, then Emma left Lily with grocery money and a hug that lingered, longer than either wanted to admit. At the train station, she stood on the platform, her heart caught between hesitation and hope. When the train slid in with a low hiss and the doors opened, she stepped forward, not into luxury or fantasy, but into uncertainty. Charles was waiting in a quiet cabin. No bodyguards, No polished entourage, just him, seated by the window, a worn book in his lap and 2 steaming coffees on the table. He looked up and smiled. Not the careful smile of a man used to deference, but something warm, unpracticed, real. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. Emma set her bag at her feet and sat opposite him. "I didn't think I would either," she admitted. "But then I remembered. The world doesn't change unless you walk into it," he said thoughtfully. Then almost shyly, "I'm not offering anything, no promises, no roads paved in gold. I just thought maybe it's time I stopped walking alone." Emma looked out the window as the city blurred, giving way to trees and open sky, the rhythm of the train settling into her chest like a heartbeat. She turned back to him. "Maybe," she said softly. "We both needed someone to remind us we're still allowed to choose something different." The train carried them forward, 2 unlikely travelers bound not by destiny, but by choice. Emma didn't know where the journey would lead, but for the first time she wasn't afraid of the answer. She wasn't chasing escape or wealth or fantasy. She was stepping into something honest, and that was enough. The days that followed felt like another life. No marble hotels or champagne brunches. Instead, mornings in quiet villages, dusty towns, guest houses scented with bread and coffee. Long rides in the back of Charles's battered Jeep, wind in her hair. He didn't live like the billionaire the papers imagined. They stopped at orphanages on the edges of small cities, where children hurled themselves into Charles's arms, calling his name not because he gave them toys, but because he remembered their birthdays, favorite stories, the jokes only they shared. They visited shelters where people rebuilding their lives told him things they told no one else. They sat on porches of homes he'd helped fund, projects built by hands he never asked to credit him, eating soup offered by people who had no idea the man across from them owned half the skyline. Emma watched, quietly moved. He never announced himself, never sought applause. One afternoon, sorting boxes in a food pantry in Vermont, she asked, "Why don't you tell people who you are?" Charles only shrugged. "Because if they knew, they'd stop talking to me like I'm human." Everywhere they went, Emma saw the same thing in his eyes. Not a search for gratitude, but for connection. More than once she caught her reflection in a window and realized she was smiling, a deep, unguarded smile she hadn't felt in years. One evening, in a cabin at the edge of a Quebec forest, they sat on the porch as crickets sang and the air smelled of pine. A single lantern glowed between them. Charles poured chamomile tea, while Emma tucked herself into a wool blanket, watching steam curl into the night. They didn't speak at first, but it wasn't an awkward quiet. It was the kind of silence that felt like shared breath. Finally, Charles leaned back, eyes on the dark beyond the trees. "I've had people offer me everything," he said slowly. "Comfort, admiration, even love." He paused, turning toward her, voice lower. "But I don't need someone to love me for what I have. I need someone who understands why I care about what I do. Someone who doesn't need to be dazzled, just present." Emma didn't rush to answer. She let the words rest between them, fragile and sure. Then she looked at him, lantern light mirrored in her eyes. "I don't know if I'm that person," she admitted. "I don't know all the reasons you are who you are." She took a breath. "But I do know this. I've never felt more like myself than I do sitting here with you." Charles didn't grin or look victorious. He just seemed at peace, as if hearing the answer he hadn't known he was waiting for. They didn't hold hands. They didn't lean closer. What they shared wasn't about closeness. It was about recognition, 2 people, generations apart, shaped by different lives, finding quiet resonance in the space between their scars. Later that night, Emma sat by the cabin window writing in her journal. Her thoughts spilled out in fragments, quiet, found, seen. She closed the book, slid it beneath her pillow and whispered into the stillness. Outside, the stars glittered above them like quiet witnesses to a story still finding its ending. Not a fairy tale, not destiny written in stone, just 2 people who once believed they were invisible until they weren't. 3 months had passed. 3 months of slow mornings and easy talks, of walking side by side through noisy markets and quiet back streets, seeing the world not from glass towers, but from cracked sidewalks and crowded shelters. Emma had changed, though not in the way people might expect. She didn't own expensive clothes, and her shoes still wore thin at the edges. Her journals were still stuffed with messy handwriting and bent corners. But something in her had shifted. Her shoulders sat a little higher, her words came slower, steadier. She no longer felt the need to explain her worth to anyone. Charles noticed too. They had just come back from a visit to a women's refuge in Detroit when he asked if they could talk alone. They climbed to the rooftop terrace of an old church being rebuilt into a community center, the skyline glowing behind them. Charles handed her a plain folder. No ribbon, no pomp. Inside were documents to create a foundation in her name, the Emma Bennett Opportunity Fund. Emma lifted her gaze, startled. "I want to leave something behind," he said quietly, "but not stamped with my name. I've had enough of that. I want the next girl, the one bussing tables, looking after her sister, wondering if anyone even sees her. I want her to know someone did." Emma didn't answer right away. Charles kept speaking, his tone gentle. "You don't have to run it," he said. "You don't even need to be involved. But it will exist because you once looked at someone not for what they had, but for who they were." She rested her fingers on the folder's edge, tracing its smooth cover. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Charles smiled. "You don't need to say anything." But she did. She inhaled slowly, her voice clear. "I'm honored. More than I can explain," she said. "But if it's all right, I want to try something different. I don't need my name on anything or yours. I want to build something from the ground up, not because I don't value this, but because someone once trusted me enough to let me trust myself. I want to give others that same faith, not with a check, but with time, with listening, with being there when no one else shows." Charles watched her, silent at first, then nodded, a smile spreading, one of quiet pride, as though he'd known this day would come. "You already have," he said. Emma looked at him. The man who had once sat trembling in a cafe, mocked for misplacing his wallet, now sitting across from her as a mirror, a mentor, a friend. Whatever they were, it didn't need a label. Not lovers, not partners, not quite family, but something sturdier, a recognition of souls, a truth too deep to define. He reached across the table and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "No matter what path you take," he said softly, "I'll always be in your corner." Emma nodded, eyes shining. No more words were needed. Their story had never been about speeches or promises. It was built on steady choices, patient faith, and the courage to let each other go, not from loss, but from trust. They stayed until the sun slipped beneath the horizon, casting golden lines over the city they'd come to love, not just as a place, but as a promise. A promise that kindness, once given without condition, always finds its way back. That sometimes the purest love is letting someone walk their own road, knowing a piece of you travels with them. Rain returned, soft and steady, as the last letters were painted on the cafe window. The first cup. Emma stood across the street, umbrella in hand, watching her vision take shape. This wasn't just any cafe. It was the cafe, the place where everything began, where a soaked, humiliated man once stood, and where a young waitress with almost nothing had offered $5 quiet. And without realizing it, she'd rewritten the course of her life. Now this space was hers, but more than that, it belonged to everyone who walked through its doors. Emma had rebuilt it from the ground up, sanding old floors until they gleamed, painting walls in warm tones, stringing soft lights overhead. Volunteers and small donors had helped, guided quietly by someone who never once asked for credit. Beneath the cafe's glass sign, etched in simple script, were the words, "No one should have to earn kindness." Inside, the room breathed with life. Soft jazz drifted from hidden speakers, golden lamps cast a cozy glow, shelves of worn books invited curious hands. A chalkboard behind the counter didn't list prices. Instead it read, "Your first cup is on us. Your second, if you can, is for someone else." A piano sat waiting for the afternoon trio. Even the tables bore hand-lettered names instead of numbers. Hope, trust, begin. Emma stood by the window, taking it all in. An overworked nurse loosening her scarf. A delivery driver resting tired hands. A mother guiding two children towards steaming mugs. It was a refuge, a place where dignity felt effortless. Then the door creaked open. A man stepped inside, shoulders hunched against the rain. He looked older, weary, his hands trembling as he held the door. There was hesitation in his eyes, as if he wasn't sure he belonged. A young barista hurried forward. "Sir, this place is for customers only. If you don't—" Emma crossed the room before the sentence could finish, resting a gentle hand on the barista's shoulder. "It's fine," she said, turning to the man with a calm smile. "Would you like a seat by the window?" He nodded, relief flickering across his tired face. "And what would you like today?" she asked. "Something warm," he murmured. "To sit for a bit, it's been a long morning." Emma's voice softened. "Then let's make it longer." "With a little peace." She glanced at the barista. "Remember, the first cup is always on us. No questions, no shame." The young man nodded, lesson quietly absorbed. As Emma walked toward the back, a pull stopped her. She turned, and there he was. Across the street, Charles stood beneath a black umbrella, coat collar turned up, eyes warm despite the rain. He didn't wave, didn't enter. He simply watched. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, farewell, and something steadier, a promise. Charles gave a single nod before turning, disappearing into the misty street. Later, during the cafe's soft opening, Emma stood beside the piano, microphone in one hand, a steaming cup in the other. Every seat was taken. The air felt alive with comfort and quiet anticipation. "Years ago," she began, "I bought someone a coffee. I didn't know his name. I only saw a person being made small, and I couldn't walk away." She paused, letting the memory settle over the crowd. "That cup cost me $5. But what it gave me was a new way of seeing the world." Some guests nodded. Others dabbed at their eyes. "I thought I was helping a man who'd lost his way," Emma continued. "But he helped me find the part of myself I didn't know I was allowed to be." She set the cup gently on the piano. "This cafe isn't really about selling coffee," she said, voice softening. "It's about presence, about showing up when no one else will." Her gaze swept the room. "Someone once told me, kindness doesn't need to be remembered. It only needs to be continued. That's what we're doing here, one cup at a time." She hesitated, then added with a tender smile, "Some loves don't need romance. And some lives are changed by nothing more than a small gesture and the courage to mean it." Applause rippled through the room. A saxophone began to sing from the corner, and somewhere at the back, a first cup was poured for someone who hadn't known they needed it until that moment. And so, the story began again. Thank you for sharing this journey, a path that started with a simple act of kindness and blossomed into something bigger than either of them could have imagined. Emma never needed a miracle. She didn't chase riches or titles. She simply chose to care on a rainy morning when no one else did. And sometimes that's enough to change not just one life, but two. If this story stirred you, reminded you of the quiet strength and compassion, don't forget to like, leave a comment, and most of all, subscribe to HOA-GLORIOUS Stories. Here we honor the tales that heal, uplift, and remind us what it means to truly be human. Join us next time. There's always another soul waiting to be seen.